Welcome to another episode of Policy Gone Viral. I'm Logan Padgett. I'm joined with JMI's Vice President of Policy, Sal Nuzzo. And today we have Michael Williams, who's the Executive Director of the Florida Chamber Foundation Florida Prosperity Initiative. Michael, thanks so much for being with us today.
Hey, thanks, Logan. Thanks for having me.
So let's just jump in. Tell our viewers a little bit about the Florida Prosperity Initiative. What is it, and why should it be important to Floridians and our listeners?
Sure. Well, to do that, I'll take us one step further back and tell you a little bit about the Chamber Foundation's 2030 blueprint, because I think that kind of tells a better story, or it informs the story of what the Prosperity Initiative is all about. So, if Florida were its own country, we'd be the 17th largest economy in the world. And to move to the top 10, which is what we need to do to continue the quality of life that Floridians expect by the year 2030, we need to move to the top 10. So to do that, we did a bunch of research, had a lot of conversations, and talked to people all over the state to come up with what are the goals and tactics that we need to do to achieve that. And that's where our Florida 2030 blueprint came from. It lines up 6 different pillars of life in Florida and 39 goals we need to achieve to make sure that we're able to hit that goal. One of those goals is, in our quality of life pillar, is to cut Florida's childhood poverty rate in half by the year 2030. And that's really where the Florida Prosperity Initiative came from. Currently, we've got about 870,505 kids living in poverty in the state of Florida. That number is down from last year, but as with the data we use is obviously it's from the U.S. Census Bureau. It's a little bit delayed, so those numbers don't really even incorporate the effects of COVID that we're going to see. And I expect that number is probably going to rise in the coming years as that data becomes available. So what we're trying to do is, as we look at those kids, because when we talk about those kids, we're not talking about kids just for kids' sake. We're talking about this for a workforce idea, because those kids, and it's crazy to me to think that my 5 and 6 year old, when we're ready to hit this goal in 2030, they're going to be looking for their first jobs, their first high school jobs, which is terrifying to say out loud. But we need to make sure that they're prepared and all their peers are prepared for the skills and the workforce training that they're going to need to have those jobs available. And for those kids who are in high school now, they're going to be entering the professional workforce around that same time. Florida is a booming economy, and we are continuing to diversify what that economy looks like every day. So we're going to make sure that we have skills and jobs that are going to continue to meet those demands of Florida's future. The crazy stat to me is that my kids and kids who are just around their age, most of the jobs that they're going to be taking and that when they enter the professional world don't exist yet, because those industries don't exist and that technology doesn't exist. So we need to continue to keep pace and continue to move forward, because this is a workforce issue. And to really tackle the special needs that really encompass the kids who are living in poverty. This is that whole statement I just talked about is every kid in Florida. But when we're talking about these 870,000, they have some extra obstacles and some extra challenges they've got to overcome. One of those, what we've tried to do is to make an apparatus that we can really talk about what are those challenges. And we've talked about, we kind of couch it in a sense of 10 root causes of poverty, things that we identify and group together that either cause poverty or cause people to stay in poverty, which is probably even more egregious to me, is it takes the things that take away hope and take away any chance of upward mobility for kids and their parents, and a lot of times their grandparents who are all stuck in this situation of generational poverty.
Right. And
That's the big picture.
Good. And you kind of gave us a sense a little bit of where Florida is currently in kind of the status quo, but what are the positives or negatives, or where are the gaps that we really need to fill between now and 2030? Sure.
So like I said, we have those 870,000 kids. We expect that number to rise with the economic downturn that COVID has created. In addition to the $15 minimum wage amendment that was just passed, while again, that was probably the intent of that is to get people more money. The actual effect of that is going to give people, it's going to create more job loss. It's going to create more poverty than exists currently. So we're trying to factor that into our analysis as well. And so both of those factors combined are going to create an effect where we're probably going to see anywhere between 500,000 and 1 million new people added to Florida's list of those who are in poverty. And that doesn't even include those included in the United Way's ALICE population, which is, for those people who don't know, is that population who are kind of living one paycheck away from disaster, who I think a lot of people who have lived through COVID have suddenly discovered they're in the ALICE population, whether they knew it or not. So that group is, those two factors together are going to continue to rise. So as far as gaps, we've identified gaps all over the place, especially in those 10 root causes of poverty. As you look at those 10 things, which are things that we always talk about, right? It's things like lack of educational opportunities, lack of job training, poor health outcomes, food insecurity, criminal justice reform, sense of agency and community voice for an individual, that if they feel like they don't contribute to society or their voice isn't being heard, then they're not going to be they're not going to have any ability to be upwardly mobile. So each of those things are gaps that we're looking at, and some of them are actually gaps that we've started to track. So if you were to go to the floridagapmap.org, you could see one of the gaps that we've already begun tracking is our third grade reading scores. And our third grade reading scores are so important because that's where children tend to stop learning to read and they start reading to learn. So if you're at third grade and you're not reading at a third grade level already, you're just going to continue to fall farther and farther behind. So we've made an effort to with our gap map is to take a look at every public school in the state of Florida. You can go and look in any zip code. You can look at any county, any public school, and see the estimated number of kids not reading at that school, at third grade level at that school. And this is not to shame teachers. It's not to shame schools, because a lot of times those teachers in those classrooms are doing far more than with what they, with the lack of resources that they have. So this is more about informing businesses and communities and local governments of, hey, here's where the gap is, here's where the need is. This is where you can go plug in today and start helping. If you don't have any clue of hey, my business is, we're small, we don't have a lot of financial resources, but we want to help. Here you go. You can go right here and look at these schools, and you can look at adopting classrooms. My wife was a kindergarten teacher here at in Tallahassee, is one of our poorest elementary schools. And she partnered with a local business, and once a month, that local business would come in and they would read a couple of books to kids, but they would bring just some cupcakes, and they would celebrate all the birthdays in that classroom for that month. Because a lot of us take that for granted, and a lot of schools, that's just not an option. And it's not something that, it's an extra that is not really, it's not appropriately given the voice to, and it means a lot to those kids.
And Mike, this is a really good segue, because your recent article in the latest issue of JMI's The Journal kind of not only highlights the details of the initiative, but also what you're doing to kind of marshal and mobilize forces. So can you expand a little bit on those specifics and where folks are able to kind of find out more, or can you just elaborate on the specifics of what kind of the mobilization is like?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about poverty in Florida, when you talk about 870,000 kids, that's almost too much for people to wrap their heads around. That's why we really try and drill down all of our data to the smallest possible unit we can, which is at the zip code level, because that's where it becomes local. It's where people understand, this is my neighborhood, these are my neighbors, these are kids that go to school with my kids. So all of our efforts focus specifically at the zip code level. But what we have kind of a tiered structure set up where we're looking at this in 3 different units. We're looking at it from the statewide level, the county level, and the zip code level. So I'll start countywide or statewide level quickly. We're putting together our statewide advisory council, and this is businesses and companies and community organizations that have kind of that statewide footprint and a vision for where Florida should be by the year 2030, and who really have a heart for these 10 root causes of poverty and have the ability to step in and say, look, this is not acceptable for the state of Florida, that we should have this many kids living in poverty, and we're going to help to fund the research and to fund the data that's needed to help move the needle. So that's kind of our broad spectrum. And below that, we have our countywide initiatives, which we're beginning to prop up all over the state. And these mirror that statewide level, but just at the countywide level. So these are United Way's, economic development councils, local chambers and urban leagues, and all those kind of more county focused organizations to come together and say, you know, my county is better than this, and we can do more. We can do better for these kids, and for all of our kids in our environment, and for all the families in poverty. So really focused at those 10 root causes, addressing those 10 root causes of poverty at the countywide level. And then one step below that is, you know, Florida has 983 zip codes. Half of our kids that live in poverty live in just 150 of those zip codes. So if you're able to attack 150 zip codes and make 100% change, you would achieve that goal of what we're trying to do is cut that poverty rate in half. But instead, we're really looking at this at every zip code matters. There are ones that are very, very high profile, and everyone knows the numbers and everyone knows the stats, and where you could probably, you know, just by looking at a map, you could say, this is probably one of the high areas, isn't it? You'd say yes, but it's a problem all over the state. So setting up 983 zip code level 10 root cause task force, essentially. So looking at, you know, this specific zip code, I'll use 32304 here in Tallahassee as an example, where one of our board of our chamber foundation trustees, Dr. Jim Murdoch from TCC, he stepped in. He's the largest employer in 32304. And he said, look, I have to be a part of this solution. I can't solve the whole thing, but I can definitely help get the ball moving down the field. So he and other organizations are teaming together for 32304 and trying to come up with long-term solutions. And that's kind of the real key to this, is that anyone can go and hand out food, or anyone can go and read to a classroom, and those are important things, but it's really, how are all these 10 root causes working against those people living in poverty? People aren't in poverty just because they don't have adequate transportation, or just because they don't have great access to food. It's all of these things working together against that individual and against that family. So creating those teams to look at somebody's needs and figure out, okay, well, what's the need in this community? You know, we have these 10 root causes, but in a lot of communities, 2 or 3 of them may float to the top as more problematic than others. So how do we focus on those first and continue to move the ball down the field that way? So that's kind of the structure of this. And you know, that's how we're trying to do. That's more the how of what we're trying to do. And you know, the why is very self-evident, but the who is who we need now. And we need those people to come forward and step forward and help us out.
Well, probably the single most important question of this interview, if there are folks anywhere in the state that are watching this, that want to learn more, that want to get involved in the initiative, whether they're an individual or a business or a community group, what is the first step for them to take?
Sure. I invite you to come to prosperityfl.org. That's our website here at the chamber, where all the information I've just talked about, I've shared, and more, you can link to from there. You know, we have that. Also, if you're not aware of the floridascorecard.org, that's a place where we track statewide and at the county level tons of different metrics, not just for prosperity, but for all across every spectrum of Florida you could think of. So that's probably the first 2 places I would go. I'd also encourage you to visit the floridagapmap.org, which is that tool I described earlier, where you can look at specifically what schools in my zip codes who need the most help, and how can we get there. One other thing that we're trying to do is to compile a list of promising practices. There are things that are working. There are businesses that have great ideas that are helping to move the needle. There are great nonprofits that are moving the needle all over the state. And it's a lack of understanding what those things are geographically. So we're trying to compile them all in one place. So if you've got things that are working in your neighborhoods, or if you're interested in learning more about our advisory council or county initiatives or local initiatives, You can, again, either visit prosperityfl.org. You can just email me at the Chamber Foundation. It's mwilliams@flfoundation.org.
And we'll make sure to post all of that when this goes live. Mike Williams, thank you so much for joining us. It is an amazing initiative. We are proud to partner with y'all and to help get the word out. And thank you for joining us for this episode of Policy Gone Viral.
Yeah, thanks, Sal. Thanks, Logan.
Thanks, Michael.